Minister François Bayrou and his minority government have collapsed after losing a crucial confidence vote in parliament.
Norwegians headed to the polls on Monday in a parliamentary election in which the future of a wealth tax is a central issue.
South Korea will repatriate 300 of its citizens this week after they were detained in a massive immigration raid at a Hyundai plant in Georgia.
France is thrown into fresh political crisis this Monday. Prime Minister François Bayrou and his minority government have collapsed after losing a crucial confidence vote in the country's lower house of parliament. Bayrou, who had been in office for less than a year, took the unprecedented step of calling the vote himself, betting that lawmakers would back his controversial plan to cut 44 billion euros in spending next year. Instead, he was handed a stinging defeat by an absolute majority of 364 votes out of a total of 558, forcing his resignation. At the heart of the political crisis are the country's fragile finances. Last year's deficit was nearly double the EU's accepted rules. That leaves French President Emmanuel Macron scrambling to find his fifth prime minister since the start of his second mandate in 2022. But outside the corridors of power, anger is growing. Grassroots groups have already announced nationwide strikes this Wednesday. And France's main unions also have planned mass protests at the end of the month to protest against these budget cuts. Sofia Katzenkova reporting from Paris for Euronews.
Norwegians headed to the polls on Monday in a parliamentary election in which the future of a wealth tax introduced over 130 years ago is a central issue. A close outcome is expected between a centre-left bloc led by the Labour Party of Prime Minister Jonas Gahr Støre and a right-wing bloc. Labour wants to keep the wealth tax, which applies a levy of 1.1% on assets and shares worth more than 1.76 million kroner. Labour says that scrapping it would cost 34 billion kroner per year. Of its rivals on the right, the Conservatives want it reduced, and the Progress Party of Sylvie Listhaug, which calls for lower taxes and more immigration controls, wants it scrapped. The Progress Party is expected to outperform the Conservatives, who are led by former Prime Minister Erna Solberg. Official results are expected to be announced on Tuesday, and they are likely to be followed by weeks of negotiations to build a coalition and agree on cabinet positions before King Harald can swear in the new government. Germany is no longer the country with the most asylum applications in the European Union, according to new data released by the European Union Agency for Asylum. By the end of June 2025, France and Spain both received more applications than Germany, which has been the main destination for asylum seekers in recent years. There was a significant dip in applications lodged by Syrian citizens, with 25,000 fewer than the first 6 months of the previous year, due to the fall of the al-Assad regime in Syria last December. Venezuela is now the main country of origin of asylum seekers. The increase is likely related to stricter immigration policy in the United States. Since Donald Trump retook office as U.S. president, he started a crackdown against Venezuelan migrants coming to the U.S. By contrast, Venezuelans can land in Europe without a visa and stay for a maximum of 90 days in the Schengen area with their passports alone.
South Korea will repatriate 300 of its citizens this week after they were detained in a massive immigration raid at the Hyundai plant in Georgia. U.S. immigration agents arrested 475 people at the site last week, most of whom were South Korean.
우리로서는 어느 정도 수위를 조절할 수밖에 없었던 것이 우리 지금 억류되어 있는 우리 국민 300여 명을 조속히 구출하는 것이 더 큰 일이었기 때문에 그랬습니다.
Videos released since the raid show workers being handcuffed and ankle-cuffed, rounded up and put on buses. The U.S. officials said the arrested workers were suspected of living and working in the country illegally. It is, however, unclear what type of visa those arrested had or whether any of them overstayed it. Over the weekend, Seoul and Washington reached an agreement over the repatriation of the detainees. The South Korean Foreign Ministry said it did not want its citizens to be deported, but to leave the country voluntarily, meaning that they could potentially re-enter the U.S. at a later date.
US President Donald Trump told reporters European leaders will visit the US on Monday or Tuesday to discuss ways to end the war in Ukraine.
Well, we're going to see. I mean, we have some very interesting discussions. You know, certain European leaders are coming over to our country on Monday or Tuesday, and individually. And I think we're going to get that settled. I think we're going to get it settled.
Trump added he would speak with Russian President Vladimir Putin soon and signaled his administration was prepared to move into a second phase of sanctions against Moscow. His comments came after Russia launched its largest ever aerial attack on Ukraine, killing at least 4 people and setting a government building alight. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said after the attack that condolences should be backed by strong action against Russia. US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent indicated that the US would be open to partnering with European countries to impose more sanctions on nations that purchase Russian oil. He said that more economic pressure should be put on Moscow in order to collapse the Russian economy.
Argentinian President Javier Milei suffered a sweeping loss in a key Buenos Aires provincial election on Sunday. The vote was seen as a litmus test for how well his Libertarian Party is set to perform in legislative elections next month. His recently formed La Libertad Avanza party scored just 34% of the vote in Argentina's biggest province, losing by a landslide to the left-leaning Peronist opposition led by former President Cristina Fernández de Kirchner, who scored 47% of the vote.
Sin ninguna duda, en el plano político, hoy hemos tenido una clara derrota. Y si alguien quiere empezar a reconstruir y salir adelante, lo primero que hay que aceptar son los resultados. Y hoy los resultados no han sido positivos y hemos tenido un revés electoral y hay que aceptarlo.
Kirchner was seen waving wildly to her supporters from the balcony of her home in celebration. A corruption conviction has barred her from politics and placed her under house arrest, but she remains an influential Peronist leader. Milei now needs to expand his party's tiny minority in the opposition-dominated Congress in midterms next month to fulfill his radical libertarian vision for Argentina's crisis-stricken economy.
It's a signal that speaks volumes about Europe's intentions in the Arctic region. Last week, the European Commission proposed doubling its financial support for Greenland as part of the next European budget. This area around the North Pole has become a focal point of global commercial and geopolitical interests. The melting of the ice caused by global warming is reshuffling the political landscape and could bring Europe closer to Asia.
Trade route in the north is much more convenient from Beijing to Rotterdam, rather than the classic one that passes through the Malacca Strait and the Suez Canal and the Gulf of Aden, which is, of course, is 30 to 50% longer. It takes 14 to 20 days more than the Arctic route.
But this route is not as open as it seems. 53% of this northern sea route runs alongside Russia, which is seeking to extend its exclusive economic zone. Additionally, this region is home to the Russian Northern Fleet. Since the Kremlin's invasion of Ukraine, tensions in the Arctic have escalated significantly. In order to defend its interests, the EU therefore cannot solely rely on member states in the region.
Think about underwater infrastructure, such as fiber optical cables. It's easy to understand why being present in the region is so important. And think about Greenland or other territories in the regions as platforms that make it possible to establish the so-called system of early warnings, or even to deploy aerial, naval, or even robotics units directly in the Arctic.
The EU is seeking to strike a balance between commercial openness and strategic protection, but access to the Arctic's hydrocarbons is also at stake for the bloc. According to estimates, the region holds 13% of undiscovered oil reserves and 30% of gas reserves.
Which European countries have the best skills? Adults in Finland ranked first in literacy and numeracy as well as in adaptive problem solving. In the 31 countries surveyed by the OECD, people between 55 and 65 obtained lower scores than younger people in all subjects. The best results were achieved by people aged 25 to 34. Portugal, Poland, Italy and Lithuania are the EU countries that fell below the OECD average in all areas. The lowest scores were reported in adaptive problem solving, where Poland scored only 226 points out of 500, followed by Lithuania with 230, Italy with 231 and Portugal with 233. Adults with highly educated parents have better literacy skills than those with less educated parents. Higher skill levels usually lead to better employment chances, higher wages and better well-being. The gap between adults from different socio-economic backgrounds is smallest in Spain.